Next, Mr. Chameleon and the Mistreated Wife murder case. Tonight, we again present the famous Mr. Chameleon of Central Police Headquarters in his famous cases of crime and murder. Brought to you by the makers of genuine Bayer aspirin. Mr. Chameleon, as you know, is the famous and dreaded detective who frequently uses a disguise to track down a killer, a disguise which at all times is recognized by the audience. Tonight, we give you Mr. Chameleon in the Mistreated Wife murder case. In the McIntyre home in the East 60s, there is absolute quiet as the clock in the hall strikes 11. But Harold McIntyre is not asleep in the luxurious room which he shares with his wife, Isabel. Instead, he lies there watching her bed until suddenly her shadowy figure rises and starts toward the door, whereupon he cries out angrily,
Isabel, come back here. Where are you going? Answer me, where are you going? You can hear me, you're not asleep. You can't fool me any longer with this sleepwalking act. You're not sleepwalking. I know perfectly well what you're up to. Isabel, will you answer me or must I slap your face again? Because I will. All right, I'll teach you to defy me this way. Oh, no. What did you do? I've been stabbed. Isabel, help me. I've been stabbed.
And not much later, we find Mr. Chameleon, the astute and dreaded detective, kneeling beside Harold McIntyre's still body. And he looks up as Detective Sergeant Dave Arnold enters the room.
Well, Dave, where's the wife, Mrs. McIntyre?
She can't see you, Mr. Chameleon, at least not for a few minutes. She's still hysterical.
I should think she would be. Must be frightful to have your husband drop dead at your feet with a knife plunged squarely between his shoulder blades. But I've got to see her.
Oh, Mr. Chameleon, I'm her father, Mr. Bedloe.
Oh?
Won't you give Isabel a few minutes to recover herself? She's in such a dreadful state. Can't you question me first?
Very well, Mr. Bedloe. Might be a good idea at that. All right, Dave, you take the knife and have it examined for fingerprints. It seems to be a hunting knife, Mr. Bedloe. Where did it come from?
Well, it was one of my son-in-law Harold's most treasured possessions. An old Indian scout gave it to him. He was a great hunter and fisherman.
I see now. I take it that you live here, in the house, Mr. Bedloe.
Yes, Mr. Chameleon. Isabel wanted me with her.
Mm-hmm.
We were always very close. I lived with her before, during her first...
What do you mean before? Was this her second marriage?
Why, yes. Her first husband was Ronald Livingston. He died about 3 years ago. Harold was his business partner.
I see. Was your daughter happy in this second marriage?
Why...
Mr. Bedloe, if you won't tell me, I expect that the servants will. Don't you think it would be better if it came from you?
Mr. Chameleon, Isabel was bitterly unhappy with Harold. He treated her brutally, and I mean brutally. But my daughter didn't kill him. She couldn't have killed him. When I heard her scream...
You heard her scream? Were you the first one here?
Yes.
And what did you see? Tell me exactly what you saw when you entered the room.
Well, Harold was lying on the floor, and Isabel was standing near him. But she'd been sleepwalking, Mr. Chameleon, and I think Harold had tried to stop her.
Sleepwalking? What doctor was treating her, Mr. Bedloe?
Why, no one.
No one? No doctor? Why not?
Well, you see,
Was she faking? Is that why you hesitate? You know that we'll have her examined.
Oh, all right, Mr. Chameleon. She was faking. I'm pretty sure she was.
Well, why? Why should your daughter pretend to sleepwalk?
Well, Mr. Chameleon, I don't know. But I do know my child is innocent of murder. Whatever her reasons for pretending to sleepwalk, Isabel didn't murder her husband.
Well, then who did? She obviously had a motive, Mr. Bedloe. Husband brutal to her, you say. She, miserably unhappy, found pretending to be sleepwalking in the bedroom where her husband was murdered. She most certainly looked suspicious. She had a strong motive.
And so did Jim McIntyre, Harold's brother.
Where is he, Mr. Bedloe?
He should be at the Antler Hotel. He used to live here, but he moved out today. He and Harold quarreled bitterly.
What did they quarrel about, Mr. Bedloe?
Well, I have no idea. Mr. Chameleon...
Isabel, where are you, sweetheart?
Is that Jim McIntyre now?
Yes, Mr. Chameleon.
And he calls your daughter sweetheart. That's very interesting. Mr. McIntyre, you come in here, please.
Yes? Who are... Mr. Bedloe, where's Isabel?
She's upstairs, Jim.
And I'm Chameleon of Central Police Headquarters. And here is your dead brother. Murdered, Mr. McIntyre. All right, Mr. Bedloe, you may go now. And please send your daughter down to me just as soon as possible.
Yes, I will, Mr. Chameleon, in a very few minutes.
Mr. McIntyre, I want to ask you to look at your brother now.
Oh,
A murdered man is never pleasant to look at, even though you are in love with his wife.
So you know about that, Mr. Chameleon. Okay, it's true. I loved Isabel. I wanted to marry her. And my brother was a monster. He treated her brutally from the day they were married.
Then why didn't you leave him?
I don't know. He seemed to have some hold on her, so she couldn't fight back.
Perhaps she enjoyed the luxury that she lived in. Could you have given her as much?
No, I couldn't. I'm an architect. I make a decent living, but that's all. But Isabel wasn't the sort of woman who stayed with a man because of money.
Well, then why did she stay with her husband, Harold?
I tell you, I don't know.
Mr. McIntyre, your brother was murdered about an hour ago. Were you in your room at the Antler Hotel at the time?
No, I was too restless. I went out for a walk. When I got back to the hotel, I found the message about my brother. Ruthie had called about 11:30.
Ruthie? Who's Ruthie?
Why, Isabel's daughter. Her 19-year-old daughter by her first marriage. Didn't you know about her?
I did not. Her grandfather, Mr. Bedloe, never mentioned her. Very odd. Unless he wanted to keep her out of the picture, if possible. Dave?
Yes, Mr. Chameleon.
Seems to be a member of the family missing. Mrs. McIntyre's daughter by her first marriage. Ruthie. You find her and send her in to me, please?
Yes, sir.
What about the knife, Dave?
No sign of any fingerprints, Mr. Chameleon.
Uh-huh. Well, then the killer wore gloves. And since one doesn't ordinarily wear gloves late at night, it proves that the murder was certainly premeditated. Mr. McIntyre, what about Ruthie?
What do you mean?
You know perfectly well what I mean, Mr. McIntyre. Did the girl like her stepfather, your dead brother?
How could she, Mr. Chameleon? She adored her mother. She's a very sensitive girl. She didn't enjoy seeing Harold abuse Isabel.
You're building up quite a strong case against young Ruthie. Almost as strong as the case against yourself.
Mr. Chameleon.
You and Ruthie both had a motive for killing Harold McIntyre. And, of course, Isabel McIntyre had the best reason of all.
What are you saying about my mother?
Well, so you're Ruthie. I'm Chameleon of Central Police Headquarters.
What are you saying about my mother? Are you calling her a murderer?
Take it easy, Ruthie.
You keep out of this, Jim. I want to know if this cop thinks my mother is a murderer.
Ruthie, when you call me a cop, you say it all. A murder has been committed, and it's up to me to find the killer, whoever it may be. That's all for now, Mr. McIntyre. I'd rather question this young woman alone.
Well, may I go up and see Isabel, Mr. Chameleon?
You may. And tell her that I'm getting very impatient. If she doesn't come down soon to be questioned, I shall have to go up to see her. Ruthie? What's this I hear about your hating your stepfather?
Yes, I did. He was an awful man, Mr. Chameleon. Mother never should have married him.
Well, are you sure that you weren't prejudiced because of loving your own father so much?
No.
Ruthie, you did love your father, didn't you? Your mother was happy in her first marriage, wasn't she?
My own father abused Mother as much as Harold did. That's what's so awful, Mr. Chameleon. She never got a break.
Well, so she was miserable the first time, too. That's odd.
What's odd about it? It wasn't her fault. But from the time I was a child, I watched my mother suffering. And when it happened again with Harold, I couldn't stand it.
Yes, so you killed him?
No, I didn't.
Ruthie, where were you when your stepfather was murdered?
In my room. I heard Mother scream, and I rushed right in.
And your grandfather?
He arrived a few minutes later.
So you got here ahead of Mr. Bedloe. Well, he didn't mention that. Again, it seems to me that he was trying to protect you. What was your mother doing?
Why, well, she looked sort of dazed, Mr. Chameleon. Mother'd been sleepwalking, I guess.
Well, your mother didn't really sleepwalk. She only pretended to.
I don't believe you. I know it was real. I saw her in the library one night with her hands stretched out before her, feeling along the wall.
Ruthie.
Mother.
Come in, Mrs. McIntyre. I'm Chameleon of Central Police Headquarters. I've been waiting for you.
Well, here I am. You may go, Ruthie.
No, she can't. Not till I find out why you tried to silence your daughter just now, and she was telling me about seeing you feeling along the wall in the library.
She imagined that.
Did you, Ruthie?
Yes, Mr. Chameleon. I just saw her sleepwalking.
About this sleepwalking, Mrs. McIntyre, I understand that you fake it. Why?
I can't answer that, Mr. Chameleon. I don't know myself.
No? Well, then, let me give you two good reasons why you might have pretended to be a sleepwalker. You used it as an excuse to get out of your room and meet Jim McIntyre, whom you loved, so you could plan your husband's murder.
No.
Or you might have planned to kill him yourself and say that you were in a sleepwalking trance when it happened.
That's a lie, too. You're persecuting my mother.
Your mother seems to have quite a talent for being persecuted, Ruthie. Mrs. McIntyre, where did you live when you were married to Ruthie's father?
I beg your pardon.
Where'd you live?
What has that to do with it, Mr. Chameleon?
Please answer me, Mrs. McIntyre. Where did you live?
In a town on Long Island called Maple Hill. But why? Why?
Mrs. McIntyre, you wouldn't answer me when I asked you why you pretended to sleepwalk. I'm afraid I'll have to return that compliment and not answer your question either.
And a short time later, in Mr. Chameleon's office at Central Police Headquarters, Mr. Chameleon is gazing at the motto which hangs above his desk. And Detective Sergeant Dave Arnold says to him,
What's the matter, Mr. Chameleon? You seem kind of low this morning.
No, not hello, Dave. I was looking at that motto, the innocent must be protected, the guilty must be punished, thinking how difficult it was sometimes to separate the guilty from the innocent.
And how? Everyone connected with the McIntyre murder looks guilty.
That fake sleepwalking act, I'm sure that Mrs. McIntyre used it to cover something else. If I only knew what that something was, Dave, Hello?
Mr. Chameleon?
Yes?
This is Police Chief Barker from Maple Hill, Long Island. I got your telegram this morning.
Good. Can you give me any information, Chief, about Isabel McIntyre? Isabel Livingston, she was then.
Sure can. She and her husband used to fight like cats and dogs. But she was a nice little thing. Neighbors felt sorry for her.
Well, did you know Harold McIntyre, her husband's partner, who became her second husband? He's the man who was murdered last night.
I knew Jim McIntyre better. You know how a small town is. Everybody thought she'd married Jim after her husband was shot.
Shot? Isabel McIntyre's first husband was shot?
Yeah, Mr. Chameleon. He was cleaning his gun. He was a great hunter. Of course, the circumstances were funny. The bullet didn't go in quite right, but that was the story. He was cleaning his gun.
Thank you, Chief. Now, I think maybe I know why Isabel McIntyre pretended she was a sleepwalker.
Mr. Chameleon and the mistreated wife murder case continues in just a moment. If you ever take anything to relieve an ordinary headache, remember this about genuine Bayer aspirin. Its single active ingredient is so gentle to the system that mothers give it even to small children on their doctor's advice. Now, this is important, for it means that Bayer aspirin is something you can take with complete confidence. It means that besides fast relief, Bayer aspirin also offers you the dependable relief that's important to your health. For Bayer aspirin is not only ready to go to work in 2 seconds, but also has an unmatched record of use by millions of normal people without ill effect. So don't experiment when you're in pain. Take no chances with drugs that have not been proved by years of successful use. For the 2 most important kinds of relief, use something you know is completely dependable, genuine Bayer aspirin. When you buy, ask for it by its full name, Bayer aspirin, not just for aspirin alone. Get the 100-tablet bottle, and you get Bayer aspirin tablets for less than a penny apiece. And now, back to Mr. Chameleon and the mistreated wife murder case. Mr. Chameleon has discovered that Isabel McIntyre's first husband died as violently as did her second husband. And we find him now in the library of the McIntyre home, saying to Isabel,
You say that your first husband's death was an accident, Mrs. McIntyre, that he shot himself while he was cleaning his gun. But the police chief of Maple Hill didn't seem quite convinced.
He's a stupid old man. He listened to gossip. Ronald's death was an accident. His gun went off while he was cleaning it.
But the bullet, Mrs. McIntyre. I understand the bullet entered his body at a very strange angle.
Then why wasn't anyone charged with murder?
I suppose there wasn't enough evidence, Mrs. McIntyre. Just as there isn't enough evidence yet to arrest anyone for the murder of your second husband, Harold. And he was murdered. There is no question of that being an accident.
Mr. Chameleon, why can't you leave me alone? Haven't I had enough?
Yes, you've had a bad time of it. First Ruthie's father, then Harold McIntyre, both of whom I'm told were miserably cruel to you. Why didn't you marry Jim McIntyre instead of his brother Harold?
That is my business.
And everything connected with this case is my business, Mrs. McIntyre. Jim was apparently in love with you when you were first widowed. Yet you picked his brutal brother. You're a very bad picker.
Mr. Chameleon, what are you driving at? The fact that I'm a bad picker, as you call it, was my misfortune.
Mrs. McIntyre, I think you picked badly, but deliberately.
Because Harold had more money, is that what you mean?
What else could I mean? What else could I mean?
Nothing. Nothing, of course. I married him for his money, and I live to regret it. And he was murdered, but I didn't do it. You'll never get your evidence.
Say, Mr. Chameleon, Mrs. McIntyre just ran right past me. Shall I go after her?
No, Dave, let her go. That's enough for today. I want to get back to headquarters. We let ourselves out the front door.
The daughter by her first marriage was upstairs hanging over the banister.
Ruthie? Was she eavesdropping?
She sure was. Shouldn't know I was watching her, but you should have seen her face. I thought she was going to blow her top any minute. Hey, Mr. Chameleon, look out. That window box, it's falling. Oh, it missed you by half an inch.
Well, that was somebody's bad luck. It fell from the second story. Come along, Dave. We're going back in the house.
What do you mean? You don't think it was an accident?
Certainly. The same sort of accident that killed Isabel's first husband.
Who on earth has a finger on the bell? Oh, why, Mr. Chameleon.
Where's your daughter, Mr. Bedlow?
My daughter?
Mm-hmm. Your daughter, Isabel McIntyre.
Why, she may be upstairs, Mr. Chameleon. I don't know.
On the second floor?
Yes, but as I say, I'm not sure.
Is your granddaughter, Ruthie, up there, too?
Why, she may be.
And Jim McIntyre?
Well, it's possible he's in the house.
Mr. Bedlow, stop trying to evade my questions. Are they upstairs or aren't they? You should know. You certainly must know if you're the only one downstairs.
Why, yes, Mr. Chameleon, I guess I am the only one downstairs. But why? What on earth is this all about?
A flower box just fell from a second-story window. If Detective Sergeant Arnold hadn't pushed me aside, I would have been killed.
Why, Mr. Chameleon. Oh, but surely it must have been an accident.
As you yourself would say, Mr. Bedlow. Maybe. Come along, Dave.
Where are you going?
Up to the second floor, and you stay where you are, Mr. Bedlow. Don't come up.
The window box must have been dropped from that room on the left, Mr. Chameleon.
Yes, Dave. The room is the upstairs sitting room. Not that I expect to find anyone still in it, but...
What am I going to do?
I don't know, Ruthie, but you've got to keep your head.
There is someone in there, Mr. Chameleon.
Yes, Dave. Come along. Let's get a little closer.
But, Jim, when you love a person, you'd do anything for them, wouldn't you?
Yes, Ruthie, I'm very much afraid you would. You don't stop to think of right or wrong at the time.
It's Jim McIntyre and little Ruthie, Mr. Chameleon.
Quiet, Dave.
Jim, what's going to happen to us? What's going to happen to us?
I don't know, Ruthie.
I thought when my stepfather was dead, things would be better. But instead, they seem to be getting worse and worse.
I know. I thought nothing could be quite as bad as having to stand by and watch my brother abuse your mother. Now, I almost wish...
That my stepfather was alive again. Well, I don't. And neither do you, Jim. But I'm afraid of Mr. Chameleon, deathly afraid. That's why I'm ready to do almost anything.
Come on, Dave. That's enough. Let's go back downstairs.
But aren't you going to question them, Mr. Chameleon?
What answers would I get that would be half as revealing as what we just overheard?
Ruthie McIntyre said she was so afraid of you that she'd do almost anything. She meant even kill you. She must have dropped that window box and tried to hit you.
Well, on the other hand, why did Ruthie and Jim McIntyre stay in that room? They knew that I'd be up there to investigate. Why didn't they clear out? Oh, here's Mr. Bedlow.
Oh, well, Mr. Chameleon?
I didn't talk to anyone, Mr. Bedlow.
You didn't?
I decided the time for talking was past. The time for action is here.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
You'll find out soon enough. Meanwhile, your granddaughter Ruthie is upstairs, and Jim McIntyre, and possibly your daughter Isabel. Will you just go up and tell them that I am still alive?
But, Mr. Chameleon, I still insist it must have been an accident.
Mr. Bedlow, that window box is much too heavy to have toppled over all by itself. Good day. Come along, Dave.
Mr. Chameleon, were you just talking, or did you really mean it when you said the time for action is here?
No, I mean it, Dave. The piece is beginning to fit together. And late tonight, I'm going into that house to find the final piece.
You're going in there in disguise? But why late at night?
Well, what sort of a person enters a house late at night, Dave? A burglar. I'm going in there disguised as a burglar. Possibly the first time in criminal history that a burglar has solved a murder.
And so, late that night, we witnessed the weird spectacle of Chameleon the detective posing as Joe McCarthy, the burglar. And with the assistance of Dave Arnold, he is busy jimmying a window of the McIntyre house. And he is saying to Dave,
This window opens into the dining room, Dave. Let me turn on my flashlight. Yes, that's the dining room. And once we get in...
If we get in.
No, we will. There goes the window right now. There we are. Now I'm going to knock something over, deliberately, to rouse the household and get them all to come downstairs. Then I want you to duck behind that screen.
Mr. Chameleon, how about that heavy candlestick? That should make a noise.
That's the ticket, Dave. Over she goes. That doesn't wake them nothing well. I have a hunch that none of them sleeping well anyhow. Listen.
Yeah.
Footsteps upstairs, yes.
Who's down there?
Well, well, so Jim McIntyre is back in his brother's house. I thought so.
Who's there? Answer me.
What is it, Jim?
Someone's in the house, Ruthie. Come downstairs with me.
I'll go too, Jim.
Then stay behind us, Isabel.
Well, this is going to be interesting, Dave. Very interesting. Get behind that screen. Have your gun handy.
You bet, Mr. Chameleon.
From here on in, I'm Joe McCarthy, the burglar.
Who's in here? Ruthie, switch on the light. You, whoever you are, put your hands up. I've got a gun here and I'll shoot.
Don't do that, boss. I got my hands up. I can't get 'em any higher.
Who are you and what are you doing here?
My name is McCarty, ma'am. Joe McCarty.
And he's obviously a burglar. Shall I call the police, Jim?
Yes, go ahead, Ruthie.
What's the matter? What's happening, Isabel?
It's a burglar, Father, and Ruthie's going to call the police.
Only I wouldn't if I was her. I wouldn't call the police. Not unless you're looking for trouble, Mrs. McIntyre.
What?
I know your name is McIntyre. I read about you in the papers. Your husband was murdered last night, wasn't he? And that ain't all.
What are you talking about?
I was going through the sideboard here looking for silver. I found a hidden drawer. I touched the spring by mistake. And in it, I found something that you wouldn't want the police to see.
He's lying, Isabel. That burglar's lying.
No. No, Jim, I'm afraid he isn't. What did you find, Mr.
McCarty, Joe McCarty. You know what I found.
Give it to me.
No, Mrs. McIntyre. If I handed it over, you might kill me, too.
Isabel.
It's all right, Father. Don't be afraid. I'll handle this. Give me that piece of paper.
No. You see, I read it. It's a confession of murder. The murder of a guy named Ronald Livingston. He was your first husband, wasn't he?
No, you can't do this to my
Drop that knife, Mr. Bedlow. Dave?
I've got him covered, Mr.
Jim
Chameleon.
McIntyre, your gun quick or I'll kill you.
Mr. Chameleon. You're Mr. Chameleon.
Yes, Isabel McIntyre, not Joe McCarty, the burglar. And I found the confession hidden in this drawer.
Oh, no.
You gave me the clue, and I put two and two together. I've suspected for some time that your pretended sleepwalking was a clever act, simply an excuse for searching this house. I presume that you married the victim, Harold McIntyre, because he had this confession about the murder of your first husband, and he used it to force you to marry him and then make you stay with him.
Mr. Chameleon.
So you see, Jim McIntyre, not only your brother Harold was murdered, but Isabel's first husband, too.
This is horrible. horrible.
But Isabel didn't do it, so don't turn away from her, Jim. My daughter Isabel didn't murder either Harold or Ronald.
I thought you'd say that, Mr. Bedlow. Because you murdered them both, didn't you? You murdered the first husband because he abused your daughter. And Harold McIntyre found out about it.
Yes. Yes, he came in just after it happened. I was hysterical. He convinced me that Isabel might be suspected, and so I wrote a confession. He kept it. He used it for his own purposes. He mistreated her. I watched. Something snapped, and I killed him, too.
And your daughter knew about the confession, didn't you, Isabel? You wanted to destroy it to set your father free.
Yes. Yes, she was looking for it all the time, even at night when she pretended to be walking in her sleep.
And it was you, too, Mr. Bedlow, who tried to drop the flower box on me from the upstairs window. I noticed that you were breathing rather heavily when you opened the front door, as though you'd run downstairs. The others stayed upstairs because they had nothing to do with it. Only you wanted to be found on the first floor.
Yes, Mr. Chameleon, I confess to everything.
Oh, Father, you shouldn't have.
No, you're wrong, Isabel. Your father should have confessed long ago. It would have saved you all a lot of misery.
Yes, that's true, Mr. Chameleon. Oh, I'm relieved that it's over with. I'll almost welcome my punishment.
I know, Mr. Bedlow. You can't cheat justice. If you do, your self-punishment is far greater than any punishment the law might impose on you.
And with these words, Mr. Chameleon concludes tonight's murder case. It's only natural that when you have an ordinary headache, you want fast relief. And to find out how quickly Bayer aspirin is ready to go to work, all you need do is test it in a glass of water. What happens to a Bayer aspirin tablet in the glass also happens in your stomach. And the speed with which it disintegrates indicates the speed with which it's ready to go to work. When you make this test, you'll see that Bayer aspirin tablets start disintegrating almost instantly, are actually ready to go to work in 2 seconds. Hence, they provide remarkably fast relief. So when you need something to relieve pain, be sure of how quickly it will act. Be sure with Bayer aspirin. When you buy, ask for Bayer aspirin, not just for aspirin alone. Get the 100-tablet bottle, and you get Bayer aspirin tablets for less than a penny apiece. Listen next Wednesday night at the same time for Mr. Chameleon, the man of many faces, in The Case of the Snarling Corpse. The part of Mr. Chameleon is played by Carl Swenson, with dialogue by Marie Baumer, from the original story by Frank and Ann Hummert. Music directed by Victor Arden. Your announcer is Warren Sweeney.
A remarkable scientific discovery now makes it possible to cut down tooth decay. You simply use new ammoniated Dr. Lyon's tooth powder. Based on a formula developed by University of Illinois scientists, it actually destroys bacteria Lactobacillus acidophilus, which cause tooth decay. Now think of the pain, worry, and expense this can save you. The wonderful difference it can make in the health and beauty of your teeth. So to cut down tooth decay, to have sounder, healthier, handsomer teeth, use ammoniated Dr. Lyon's tooth powder. Both regular Dr. Lyon's tooth powder and new ammoniated Dr. Lyon's are at all drug and toilet goods counters.
Listen for Mr. Chameleon in The Case of the Snarling Corpse next Wednesday night at this time. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.